Close your eyes. Feel the day letting go of you. Everything that was urgent, loud, or important is now fading beyond the edge of this silence. Right now, you're in a space of calm, a space where stories ask nothing of you, where time slows, down like breath before sleep. And it's in this state that we begin. No rush, no dates, no arguments or debates. Tonight we travel into the distant past, but not as tourists with cameras, rather as dreams, as shadows gliding along ancient columns. The theme of our nighttime walk, Rome, an empire whose echoes still resonate in laws, in language, in architecture, in the very concept of civilization. We won't study history, we'll remember it, as if it's not something long gone, but something that lives deep in our memory. Why remember Rome at night? Because it's at night we truly listen. When the noise of the world fades, the voice of history becomes clearer. At night, the mind doesn't cling to details or demand logic. It accepts, it feels. And that's how an empire that once spanned the known world should be experienced, through feeling, through imagery, through breath. Rome is not just a collection of facts, it's a dream made of stone, a desire to outlast time, to leave a mark, to create something so grand it would outlive its makers. Tonight, before sleep, we'll walk the path of that dream together, from a modest hill where one brother killed another, through triumphs, feasts, and blood spilled on mosaic floors, and then toward the fall, toward silence, toward overgrown streets where shepherds once led their flocks among the ruins. But for now, it's all still ahead. Picture it. Early morning. A soft mist, the sun rising over the Tiber. There is no marble yet, no legions, only hills and the smoke of the first fires. This is where Rome begins, not with senators, not with emperors, but with myth, with a she-wolf, two brothers, and those who looked upon a hill and said, "Here will be a city that outlives centuries." Maybe none of it really happened, but does it matter when we dream? In dreams, anything is possible, even witnessing the birth of the eternal city. We walk slowly. We're not rushing anything. We're breathing in the air of that era. It smells of smoke, herbs, horses, and damp stone. There is still wildness here, but already something more. Already an idea. Rome was always an idea, even when it was just a small settlement, because its people believed they were different, that they had a destiny to rule. But tonight, we're not here to judge. We won't debate whether that destiny was a blessing or a curse. Tonight, we're simply here, to listen, to feel, to be part of the current. We imagine how, with time, homes rise, streets form, plazas take shape, how ordinary people become citizens, how forums emerge, where laws, disputes, and land are discussed, how a republic matures, how the footsteps of soldiers echo across cobblestones, and all of it, not with noise, but in a whisper, because we're listening through the centuries. Like a mother's voice heard in a dream, like the sound of rain through a pillow, Rome traveled a long road. It outlived its kings, banished them, built a republic, a system that seemed eternal. It gave birth to senators, generals, philosophers. It conquered and lost. It built roads, temples, aqueducts. And all of this wasn't frenzy, wasn't chaos. It was rhythm, deep, heavy, like the heartbeat of a great machine. Rome is the heartbeat of antiquity, but alongside its grandeur there was always unease, because everything that rises eventually falls. And Rome knew this. Perhaps that's why it built so grandly, so the fear of vanishing could dissolve into columns and basilicas. Tonight, we walk its streets. Imagine a warm evening, cobblestones, fountains, wine, music, homes lined with mosaics, speeches echoing under domes, statues watching you with hollow eyes. This is Rome, but behind the facades, struggle, Behind every smile, intrigue. Behind every general, blood. That doesn't make Rome bad. It makes it alive, just like us. You might imagine yourself as a patrician or a slave, a senator or a craftsman, a woman carrying water from the river, a child playing in the shadow of an aqueduct. All of it, pieces of one great living organism. And now night falls, a night like this one. You sit by a window, hear distant footsteps, see torches flicker, and within you, silence. It's this silence we fill this story with. A silence where images are born. You don't need to remember anything, you don't need to analyze, just listen. Let Rome drift into your dreams. Let yourself forget you're in the present. Let yourself become a shadow on the wall of an ancient temple. A candle flickering in a philosopher's home. A grain of dust falling on the stone of the forum, because tonight you're not just a listener. You are part of the story. You are a trace in the sands of time. You are a memory. And when you fall asleep, Rome will be beside you. It will walk with you in your dreams, through its streets, through its battles, through its twilight. And when you wake up tomorrow, you'll feel it. You were there. Before Rome was Rome, before its streets were paved with mosaics and its legions shone with bronze, there was silence. There was mist over the Tiber. There were hills covered in dense forests. There was myth. There were legends. And there were people sitting by the fire whispering stories about the beginning. That is where we begin. From the oldest myths, the raw clay from which the future empire would be shaped, Aeneas and the flight from Troy. The myth of Aeneas is not just a crucial milestone in the history of Rome, it also represents the embodiment of valor, honor, and destiny, values deeply important to the Roman people. While other heroes of the Trojan War, like Achilles and Odysseus, became symbols of individual feats and personal glory, Aeneas came to represent a national destiny, embodying the ideals that Romans would strive to uphold for centuries. Aeneas was the son of Anchises, a noble Trojan, and Venus, the goddess of love. When Troy was destroyed, Aeneas was among the few who survived, and it was he who was fated to carry on his lineage and lay the foundations of a new city. This myth became a cornerstone of Roman patriotism, for according to prophecy, Aeneas was not merely a refugee, but a hero destined to lead his people to prosperity in a distant land. After the fall of Troy, Aeneas set off with the surviving Trojans in search of a new homeland. Their journey was filled with hardship, and the myth of his travels reads like an epic, filled with divine interventions, mystical encounters, and harsh trials. One of the most powerful episodes is his journey into the underworld, where he meets the spirit of his father, Anchises. There, Anchises reveals to Aeneas the future of his people and points to the land where Rome is destined to rise. Aeneas's guiding star is more than a symbol of personal strength. It is the fate of Rome itself, drawing him onward toward greatness. Rome's founding is based on the belief that glory is earned through struggle, that its people must become the greatest nation in the face of all obstacles. Aeneas became the symbol of these ideals, a hero not by his own ambition, but by the will of the gods. This myth, like many others, played a crucial role in shaping Roman identity. Every Roman could see in it a reflection of their destiny, their strength, and their duty. The legend of Romulus and Remus. The most famous and perhaps most important Roman legend is the story of Romulus and Remus. These twin brothers became the founders of Rome, and their myth came to symbolize not only the birth of the city, but the Roman aspiration for a powerful and victorious state. According to legend, Romulus and Remus were the sons of Mars, the god of war, and Rhea Silvia, daughter of the rightful king of Alba Longa. Yet their lives were marked by tragedy from the very beginning. Their great-uncle Amulius had usurped the throne from his brother Numitor, and fearing any claim to power, ordered the infants to be drowned, but by the will of the gods, the twins were saved. They were discovered and nursed by a she-wolf in a cave, becoming symbols of strength and resilience. This iconic scene, two infants under the protection of a wild beast, became one of the most enduring images of Roman mythology. It was there that their destiny began to unfold. When Romulus and Remus grew up, they decided to found a new city. But a conflict arose between the brothers about where it should be built. Romulus chose the Palatine Hill, one of the 7 hills of Rome, and, according to legend, this was where the city was founded. Remus, however, disagreed with the decision. He mocked Romulus, making jokes at his expense, until finally Romulus killed his brother. This tragic event came to symbolize the harsh truth of Roman history. Only through internal conflict and the struggle for power could Rome find its strength and greatness. Romulus became the first king of Rome, and under his rule the city began to grow and expand. He established the first Roman army, set laws in place, organized governance, and laid the foundation for what would become the Roman state. Romulus himself became a symbol of the Roman ideal, combining the roles of ruler, warrior, and lawgiver. The first settlements along the Tiber. Rome's location on the banks of the Tiber was no accident. This stretch of the river was perfectly positioned for both trade and defense. It allowed access to the sea, while being surrounded by hills, making the city naturally fortified. Rome did not appear overnight. It was the result of a long process, involving migration and the blending of different ethnic groups. The earliest settlements on what would become Roman territory were small villages that slowly grew thanks to their favorable geography and contact with neighboring peoples like the Etruscans and Latins. The Romans built their settlements with great consideration for the natural landscape. Over time, Rome attracted migrants from across the region. Local Latin tribes, Etruscans and Sabines, brought their traditions and cultures into early Roman development. The Etruscans in particular had a profound influence on Roman architecture, religious rituals, and helped shape Rome's first public institutions. The myth of Romulus and Remus was not only a symbol of the city's origin, it reflected how Rome unified various peoples and cultures, laying the groundwork for its future greatness. Rome began as a humble village, but it would eventually transform into a mighty city. Even in its earliest centuries, it became a key center, drawing not only traders and migrants, but also invaders who sought to claim its riches and resources. Its position on the Tiber and its natural defenses allowed Rome to solidify its power and expand its territory rapidly, even in the face of constant external threats. Historical and archaeological evidence confirms that early Rome had a far more complex and diverse social structure than one might expect from a small settlement. Even during the early Republic, Rome already had a defensive system, an organized military, and the first forms of governance, structures that would later evolve into the heart of Roman political life. Early Rome and the regal period. Roman history began during the regal period, which, according to legend, lasted from the city's founding in 753 BCE to 509 BCE. This era was marked not only by political and social transformation, but also by the creation of Rome's first institutional frameworks and the strengthening of its cultural and religious foundations. The regal period was long and filled with challenges and change, turning Rome into the center that would eventually become a vast empire. During this time, Rome was ruled by 7 kings, each of whom left a mark on its development. It's important to note that these kings weren't just political figures. They actively contributed to the shaping of Rome's cultural and religious identity. Through war, reform, and ritual, they laid the bedrock for the Rome that would endure for centuries. According to legend, the first king of Rome was Romulus, the twin brother of Remus, whom, as we remember, he killed. Romulus became the founder of Rome as well as its first king. He laid the foundation for Rome's state structure by organizing the people into the first army and establishing the earliest laws. He created the Roman Senate, composed of 100 noble citizens known as patricians, and made significant decisions regarding the distribution of land among the population. Romulus also founded Rome's first sanctuary, a temple on the Capitoline Hill, and introduced the practice of electing new kings when necessary. In Roman mythology, Romulus is regarded as the founder of the Roman army, as well as the originator of the first Roman customs and rituals. Though Romulus is clearly a mythological figure, and historians cannot definitively link him to any real ruler, his legend had a profound impact on Roman cultural identity and its political system. After Romulus, the throne passed to Numa Pompilius, the second king of Rome, who reigned from 715 to 673 BCE. Numa was renowned for his peaceful nature and religious leadership. His reign was relatively tranquil, and he focused on strengthening Rome's internal stability and establishing key religious institutions. He founded Roman religious practices and formalized rituals of worship. Numa appointed priests, organized religious ceremonies, and promoted a culture of moderation and reverence for the gods. Numa also introduced a number of laws regulating Roman holidays and created important religious offices such as the pontiffs, high priests, and augurs, prophetic priests. He placed special emphasis on the cult of Janus, the god of doors, transitions, and time, who symbolized Rome's stability and prosperity. Numa is also credited with developing a calendar system and implementing rituals that became integral to Roman religion and culture. Tullus Hostilius became the third king of Rome, ruling from 673 to 642 BCE. Unlike Numa, Tullus was a military leader who aimed to expand Rome through conquest and war. His reign was marked by constant military conflict with neighboring peoples, including Alba Longa, an ancient city located south of Rome. In 672 BCE, Tullus won a famous war against Alba, after which the two nations united, and the Romans became the dominant military force in the region. Hostilius also played a key role in strengthening Rome's military power and continued to develop the army. He introduced new military structures and refined strategic principles of warfare, which later contributed to the expansion of the Roman Empire. Ancus Marcius, the fourth king of Rome, reigning from 642 to 617 BCE, was known for his wise governance and extensive construction projects. He significantly expanded Rome by incorporating new territories, including Ostia, which became an important Roman port. Ancus also established the first Roman forts, strengthening Rome's defenses and improving the city's infrastructure. His rule also saw the creation of some of Rome's earliest laws, which laid down crucial economic and social norms. Ancus Marcius was also known for his peaceful disposition and his efforts to enhance internal order. He continued to build upon the religious and legal institutions previously established by Numa Pompilius. Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, the fifth king of Rome, reigning from 617 to 579 BCE, was of Etruscan origin and became the first Etruscan king of Rome, a fact that played a key role in the city's development. Tarquinius Priscus significantly strengthened Rome, expanding its influence and creating new military structures. He commissioned the construction of the famous Capitoline Temple and introduced reforms in the army, increasing its size and combat effectiveness. However, his reign was not without difficulties. His power was challenged, ultimately leading to his tragic death. Nevertheless, the legacy of Tarquinius Priscus was crucial for Rome's continued growth, and his reforms bolstered both the Roman military and culture. Servius Tullius, the sixth, king of Rome, reigning from 578 to 535 BCE, left a lasting impact on Roman politics and law. He was known for his reforms aimed at improving Rome's social and political structure. Tullius divided the Roman population into census-based classes, which promoted a fairer distribution of land and property across different social strata. As part of these reforms, he also created a system of popular assemblies, allowing citizens to take part in the political life of Rome. He further strengthened Rome's defensive structures, notably building the famous Servian Wall, which protected the city from external threats. Servius Tullius was a king who actively promoted social mobility and expanded the rights of Rome's lower classes. Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, was the seventh and final king of Rome, reigning from 535 to 509 BCE. His reign was marked by cruelty and tyranny, which eventually led to his overthrow and the end of Rome's monarchical era. Tarquinius Superbus was notorious for his disregard of Roman traditions and his despotic rule. Still, he carried out several construction projects, including the completion of the Capitoline Temple, which became a symbol of Rome. Tarquinius Superbus ultimately lost the support of the people, and in 509 BCE, a popular uprising led to his expulsion from the city. This revolt marked the beginning of Rome's transition from monarchy to republic, foundations of Roman culture and early institutions. The regal period played a vital role in shaping Roman culture, religion, art, and architecture. Roman culture began to take form under the influence of the Etruscans, Latins, and other peoples who inhabited the Italian peninsula. During this time, the foundations of Roman religion, law, and artistic expression were laid. Roman religion was deeply integrated into daily life and included a vast array of gods and cults. Not only were major deities like Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva important, but so too were gods who governed more specific aspects of life, such as household gods, gods of winemaking, and protective deities who safeguarded the city from enemies. Roman architecture and art also flourished under Etruscan influence. The construction of the first temples, fortresses, and roads helped strengthen the infrastructure of the growing city. The Romans pioneered distinctive architectural innovations, such as arches, vaults, and domes, that would later influence the architecture of all of Europe. The end of the monarchy. The conclusion of the monarchical period marked a pivotal stage in Roman history. After the overthrow of Tarquin the Proud, the Romans decided that monarchy should no longer exist. Instead, they established a republic where power was shared between two consuls elected by the people. This transition was a critical step in Rome's political evolution and laid the groundwork for its transformation into an empire. Thus, although the monarchy was relatively short-lived, it was a formative period for the Roman state, culture, and institutional framework, all of which left a lasting impact on history. The Republic and the struggle for survival. Structure of the Republic. The Roman Republic, which lasted from 509 BCE to 27 BCE, was a unique political system in which power was divided among various institutions, providing it with both flexibility and long-term stability. One of the most important elements of the Republic was its political structure, which included the Senate, the consuls, and the popular tribunes. The Senate was the highest authority in Rome, composed mainly of aristocrats or patricians. It was a body of former magistrates who had accumulated experience in public administration throughout their careers. The Senate played a major role in shaping Roman policy, debating and advising on critical issues, including foreign affairs, domestic governance, and military campaigns. Unlike a modern parliament, The Senate did not have full legislative power. It could only issue recommendations and express its will, but could not enact laws directly. Legislative authority resided with the popular assemblies, in which all Roman citizens had the right to participate. The consuls were elected magistrates who served as the top executives of the Republic. 2 consuls were chosen each year, and their terms were limited to 1 year, to prevent excessive concentration of power. The consuls had broad powers, including commanding the army, conducting negotiations, signing international treaties, and performing judicial duties. They acted jointly, and to prevent abuses of power, each consul had the right to veto the other. This created an effective system of checks and balances. The popular tribunes were vital defenders of the rights of the plebeians or lower classes. They had the authority to veto decisions made by magistrates and the Senate, giving them significant political influence. Tribunes represented the interests of ordinary citizens and used their powers to protect their rights. Importantly, the veto power was a powerful tool that prevented officials from acting against the will of the people. The tribunes could also convene popular assemblies where important matters were discussed and decided. Plebeians and their tribunes often clashed with the patrician elite, sparking social and political reforms throughout Rome's history. Together, these 3 institutions, the Senate, the consuls, and the popular tribunes, formed the political structure of the Roman Republic, with built-in checks and balances. While the system was far from a modern democracy, it maintained a certain degree of balance between the different social classes, the Gallic invasion and the rebuilding of Rome. The year 390 BCE marked a significant turning point in Roman history. It was the moment when Gallic tribes, led by the chieftain Brennus, invaded Italy and sacked Rome. The Gallic invasion became one of the most shameful episodes in the city's history. According to legend, after capturing the city, the Gauls demanded a massive ransom in gold from the Romans. The story about the scales failing to balance the required amount of gold was popular in ancient sources, though its historical accuracy remains doubtful. Historians believe this tale may have been exaggerated, reflecting the humiliation of the defeat. The Gauls did indeed plunder Rome and burned many of its buildings, but they failed to maintain control over the city for long. While Brennus demanded a large ransom, the city of Rome was quickly rebuilt thanks to the efforts of its citizens and its political organization. At the time of the invasion, Rome was still a relatively weak state, but this defeat helped ignite a sense of national identity and a drive to restore lost pride. In the aftermath of the Gallic invasion, Rome launched large-scale efforts to improve the city's defenses. It strengthened its walls and developed a new system of fortifications to better resist enemy attacks. The Romans also carried out a series of reforms that reinforced their internal structure and helped unite society. Rome rose like a phoenix from the ashes, overcoming its loss, marking the beginning of a new chapter in its development, the social war and the expansion of Rome's borders. The social war, which broke out in 91 BCE, became a decisive event in the history of the Roman Republic. The root of the conflict was the issue of granting Roman citizenship to Italy's allied communities. These Italian allies had served Rome militarily for many years, but were denied political rights. This injustice eventually led to rebellion, as several Italian cities formed a coalition known as the Italian League, and rose up against Rome. The war lasted nearly 3 years, and in the end, Rome was forced to offer citizenship to its Italian allies to end the conflict. One of the most important outcomes of the social war was that Rome emerged as the dominant power in Italy, absorbing many independent Italian states and solidifying its control over the peninsula. Over time, nearly all Italian cities, except a few isolated tribes, were granted Roman citizenship, further expanding Rome's influence and authority over the region. For Rome, these wars marked a turning point that transformed the internal structure of the Republic. Granting citizenship to Italians strengthened Rome's political position, but also brought new challenges and social tensions. The Roman Republic had to adapt to changes brought on by the growing number of citizens and ongoing territorial expansion. Over time, Rome's borders continued to expand. The Republic began actively incorporating new lands into its domain, including Greece, Asia Minor, and other regions. This expansion increased Rome's military strength, but also created additional challenges in governing the vast new territories. Roman magistrates and generals now had to manage not only domestic affairs, but also the administration of far-reaching provinces. Thus, the Roman Republic, throughout its development, faced numerous political and military challenges. The interaction between the Senate, consuls, and popular tribunes ensured both stability and flexibility in governance, but it also led to internal conflicts, such as those seen during the Gallic invasion and the Social War. These events helped shape Rome into a powerful state that, despite internal contradictions, achieved tremendous success and expanded its territory. All of this laid the foundation for Rome's transition from a republic to an empire, which in turn opened a new chapter in its history, the Punic Wars and Rome's rise to international greatness. One of the most thrilling and dramatic episodes in Roman history is the era of the Punic Wars, during which Rome clashed with the mighty city of Carthage. These wars decided the fate of the Mediterranean world and determined Rome's future as a global power. At the heart of this rivalry stood the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca, who would become one of the greatest military strategists of the ancient world. Hannibal was born in 247 BCE into a family deeply rooted in Carthage's military tradition. His father, Hamilcar Barca, was a prominent general and a fierce opponent of Rome during the First Punic War. Hannibal grew up in an environment steeped in hostility toward Rome and was prepared from a young age to continue that fight. He became famous for his military feats, especially his astonishing march through the Alps in 218 BCE. When Hannibal took command of the Carthaginian army, he chose not to wait for Rome to strike first. Instead, he brought the fight to Italy itself. He assembled one of the most experienced armies of his time and approached Rome from an unexpected direction, crossing the Alps. This march became a legendary achievement, both for Hannibal and for his soldiers. Hannibal led an army that included infantry, cavalry, war elephants, and a variety of allies, including Gallic tribes and other Italian peoples. The crossing of the Alps was a grueling ordeal. The army faced frigid temperatures, treacherous mountain paths, and constant danger. The losses were staggering, yet Hannibal's determination never faltered, and after overcoming the mountains, he marched on into Italy. The Alpine crossing was not only a heroic feat, it was a masterpiece of strategic planning. Hannibal masterfully used the terrain, the element of surprise and psychological warfare, to defeat the Roman legions sent to stop him. He won major victories at Lake Trasimene in 217 BCE and at Cannae in 216 BCE, where the Roman forces suffered devastating defeats. The Battle of Cannae became one of the most famous in military history, and its impact on Rome was profound. Hannibal used brilliant tactics to defeat a Roman army nearly twice the size of his own. He orchestrated a maneuver that surrounded and crushed the Roman legions. The losses were catastrophic. Over 50,000 Roman soldiers were killed, making it the most disastrous defeat the Roman Republic had ever suffered. However, despite these victories, Hannibal was unable to finish his campaign and capture Rome itself. The confrontation with Hannibal became a great test for Rome. Despite heavy losses and the shock of such significant defeats, the Romans displayed remarkable resilience and determination. Rome continued the war, strengthening its position and gathering forces to counter the Carthaginian threat. After several years of fierce battles and destruction, the Carthaginian army, led by Hannibal, was unable to achieve a decisive victory over Rome. There were several reasons for this. First, Hannibal was unable to force Rome out of the war, and despite his victories, his army failed to gain a decisive advantage. Rome, on the other hand, kept fighting and surviving, and its ability to mobilize and organize new troops played a crucial role. Meanwhile, in Carthage, it became clear that Hannibal could not finish his victorious campaign. Carthage faced political instability. While Hannibal continued his military operations, Carthage began seeking ways to address the issue at sea, where Rome held a significant advantage. In 204 BCE, the Roman general Scipio Africanus, a young and talented commander, took the initiative. He entered Africa and advanced toward the Carthaginian capital, forcing Hannibal to return home to defend it. Scipio was resolute, and in 202 BCE, he achieved a decisive victory at the Battle of Zama, where the Romans, despite all of Carthage's advantages, emerged victorious. This marked the end of the Punic War and the final defeat of Carthage. As a result of the peace treaty, Carthage lost all of its territories and a significant portion of its army. Under the terms of the peace, the Carthaginians were required to surrender their entire fleet to Rome and cease all hostilities. Hannibal, though he returned to Carthage, was no longer able to exert significant influence on his country's politics. The defeat of Carthage was a pivotal moment in Roman history. It ended the long-standing rivalry with Carthage and elevated Rome to the status of a great naval power. Carthage was forced to submit to Rome's terms and lost its status as a major power. Victory in the Punic Wars brought Rome not only territorial gains, but also a strategic advantage at sea. The Roman Empire, traditionally focused on its powerful land army, made great strides in expanding and strengthening its navy. The victory over Carthage also marked the beginning of a new phase in Rome's development as a naval power. Before this, Rome had not been particularly strong at sea. Although the Romans had mastered shipbuilding and naval affairs, their fleet was no match for the Carthaginian one, which was one of the most powerful in the Mediterranean. However, through the wars with Carthage, Rome learned to conduct naval warfare, adopting tactics and technologies that would later help Rome dominate the seas. To combat the Carthaginian fleet, the Romans adapted their strategies and technologies. They employed a tactic called corvus, or crow, which allowed their legionaries to board enemy ships and engage in close combat. Roman ships were specifically designed to capture enemy vessels, giving Roman soldiers an advantage in battle. As a result, Rome was able to secure naval victory. After the victory in the Punic Wars, Rome solidified its dominance in the Mediterranean. Despite its efforts, Carthage was unable to restore its fleet, and Rome became the most powerful naval state in the region. This victory meant that Rome had truly become a maritime power, opening new horizons in trade, territorial expansion, and strengthening its influence in the Mediterranean. With the strengthening of its fleet, Rome began to explore new sea routes, which facilitated the development of trade and the economy. Roman ships began to protect trade routes, ensuring the safety of merchant vessels, and over the following decades, Rome continued to build and fortify its naval forces. The Punic Wars were not only a significant stage in Rome's military history, but also a decisive moment in the formation of the Roman Empire as a global power. The victory over Carthage and Hannibal, as well as the mastery of the seas, strengthened Rome as a great state, ready to control the entire Mediterranean and significantly expand its territories in the future. Internal conflicts, the path to dictatorship. When the empire was still not an empire, and Rome was merely a growing republic, changes were already brewing within. After the glorious victories over Carthage, after conquests and territorial expansion, Rome gained strength, but along with it, cracks began to appear. It was within, among citizens and patricians, among plebeians and senators, that the quietest storm began. It was a storm that did not thunder immediately, but whispered like the wind shifting direction before a hurricane. Land. It all started with it. In Rome, land was not only a source of wealth, but also a right to participate in the life of the state. After the Punic Wars, many farmers who had served in the army returned home to find their land either destroyed or bought by wealthy senators. Huge latifundia were created, estates where slaves captured in military campaigns worked. And the Roman plebs, the small landowners, the very bones and blood of the Republic, were pushed into the cities, into Rome, where they sought bread and work. It was then that the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, stepped onto the stage. They were from a noble family, but they saw the suffering of the people. Tiberius Gracchus became a tribune of the people in 133 BCE and proposed a law. No one could own more than a certain amount of public land. Everything beyond that would be given to poor citizens. It seemed noble, but the aristocrats rebelled. They were the ones who owned these lands. The Senate began to block the reforms. Tiberius then went against tradition. He removed another tribune who was obstructing the law and succeeded in having the reforms passed. He was accused of violating the customs of the ancestors, mos maiorum. And for Romans, this was as if challenging the gods themselves. Soon Tiberius was killed on the Capitol in the temple. This was the first political assassination in the history of the Republic. A decade later, his younger brother Gaius continued his brother's work. He proposed even more sweeping reforms, extending rights for the Italians, establishing fixed prices for bread, and creating new colonies for settlers. Gaius also died, and with him, the hope for peaceful change perished. The idea that Rome could be changed from the bottom up through laws and the will of the people shattered against the rock of senatorial will and tradition. But the seeds had been sown. The crisis intensified. New figures appeared: Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. One, a man of humble origins, Homo Novus, who achieved fame in the army and was elected consul. The other, a noble patrician, smart, cold-blooded and vengeful. They were allies and then became enemies. Marius reformed the army. He allowed not only landowners, but also the poor, the proletariat, to serve in the legions. This meant that soldiers were now dependent not on land, but on the general who provided them with plunder, housing, and land after service. Army loyalty shifted from the Republic to the general, and this was the beginning of the end. Sulla and Marius initially fought side by side, but then a precedent was set. The Senate entrusted Sulla with a campaign in the east, but Marius tried to take command from him. In response, Sulla did the unthinkable. He marched his legions on Rome itself. This was not an enemy from abroad. This was a citizen with an army. And Rome fell. Without a fight, Sulla briefly left the city to finish his military campaign, and during his absence, Marius returned, seized power, and slaughtered his enemies. Then Marius died. Sulla returned to Rome and enacted a counter-massacre. Blood flowed through the Forum. The name of the Republic no longer rang like an ideal, but echoed as a thing of the past. Sulla became dictator, legally but under special conditions, without term limits. He carried out proscriptions, lists of enemies who could be killed with impunity, their property seized. More than 2,000 senators and equestrians were killed. He enacted reforms, limiting the power of the tribunes, strengthening the Senate, and weakening democracy. And then he renounced power. He retired. He died in his house alone, with a liver destroyed by wine and paranoia, but the spirit of dictatorship was already in the air. From this darkness, new heroes emerged. Pompey the Great, a young general who gained fame in Spain and Asia. Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome who crushed Spartacus's rebellion. And, finally, Julius Caesar. Caesar was ambitious. He came from an old family of the Julii, but he was not wealthy. He was a brilliant orator, general, and politician. Rome was in chaos, and these three men, Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar, formed a secret alliance, the first triumvirate. They divided power among themselves. Caesar was given Gaul, a northern province wild but full of potential. Caesar began his conquests. His legions marched through France, reaching Britain. His Commentarii de Bello Gallico, commentaries on the Gallic War, read like a novel, carefully written to impress the public. He became a hero. Meanwhile, Crassus was killed in Parthia, and relations with Pompey soured. The Senate sided with Pompey and demanded that Caesar return to Rome without his army. But Caesar, like Sulla before him, led his legions across the Rubicon. "The die is cast," he said. It was a challenge, it was civil war. Caesar won. Pompey fled to Egypt and was killed. Caesar entered Rome as a victor, as a savior, as a dictator. He did not destroy the institutions, he subordinated them to himself. He was granted dictatorial powers, first for 1 year, then for 10, and eventually for life. He pardoned his enemies, he reformed the calendar, he distributed land and built temples. But something troubled the Romans. He wore purple, sat on a golden throne, allowed himself to be called emperor, and accepted honors as a deity. And on the Ides of March in 44 BCE, during the festival when the Senate was supposed to convene, a group of senators, including Brutus and Cassius, attacked him. He was stabbed 23 times. He died at the foot of Pompey's statue, his face covered by his toga. Caesar was dead, but the Republic did not return, for others were already standing behind him. Octavian, his adopted son. Mark Antony, his closest ally. A new civil war began, which would end only when Octavian, becoming Augustus, would be the first emperor, not by name but by essence. Thus ended the journey from Rome as a republic to Rome as an empire. And this path was paved not only by laws and reforms but also by blood, ambition, and the shadow of the man who once crossed the Rubicon. Peace descends upon the streets of the ancient city. The footprints of sandals are erased by the dust of time. Legionaries, tribunes, senators, they all became mere names in memory. But their steps echo in the marble halls of history. And Rome, still alive, pauses for a moment before it breathes again. The empire begins. Augustus and the Roman world. The Roman Republic, having survived numerous wars, political crises, and internal conflicts, finally came to its historical end. After the assassination of Gaius Julius Caesar and the civil wars that followed, power in Rome fell to Octavian, who would later be given the title of Augustus. This moment marked a turning point in the history of ancient Rome, as his rule heralded the beginning of a new era, the era of the Roman Empire. In this context, we will look not only at the political transformations under Augustus, but also at his reforms in art, architecture, and governance, which played a crucial role in shaping Rome's greatness and its legacy for future generations. The emergence of the Principate. After Caesar's death, Rome plunged into a long and destructive civil war. Battles between various claimants to power, Mark Antony, Lepidus, and Octavian, ended in 31 BCE with a decisive victory for Octavian at the Battle of Actium. From this moment on, Octavian became the sole ruler of Rome, but his reign was not like that of monarchs in other countries. Instead of declaring himself dictator or king, he carefully concealed his absolute power behind the facade of traditional republican institutions. He took on the title of princeps, which meant first among equals. This title implied that he remained a part of the Roman Senate, just as before, but at the same time he became the de facto supreme ruler. This political system, known as the Principate, was skillfully orchestrated by Octavian and became the foundation for the Roman Empire, which would last for over 4 centuries. It was a new political structure in which the outward forms of republican governance were preserved, but power was concentrated in the hands of one man. In 27 BCE, Octavian, symbolically returning to republican values, voluntarily handed over his power into the hands of the Senate and the people of Rome. However, his intentions ran deeper. The Senate granted him titles that allowed him to remain the supreme ruler. It was at this moment that he received the title of Augustus, which meant majestic or revered. Thus Octavian became the first emperor of Rome, and his reign marked the beginning of a new era, the era of the empire, reforms of Augustus. Augustus's rule was not only a time of political stabilization, but also a period of reforms that touched on various aspects of life in the Roman Empire. These reforms were crucial for the further development of Rome, and their influence was felt throughout the entire history of the empire. Administrative reforms. Augustus understood that to rule effectively, it was essential to manage the vast territory of the Roman Empire. He implemented reforms in the administrative system, dividing the empire into provinces that were under the control of both the Senate and the emperor. The division of provinces improved governance, enhanced tax efficiency, and ensured stability. In distant regions, Augustus paid particular attention to the provinces where the most significant events took place. He actively controlled military resources, maintaining a standing army. Provinces directly controlled by the emperor had a significant military presence, which allowed him to ensure internal security and maintain discipline. Army reform. One of Augustus's most important reforms concerned the army. He established a standing professional army, which significantly increased its combat readiness. Soldiers were paid, which enhanced their loyalty. A system of auxiliary forces was also introduced, strengthening the empire's borders and allowing for wars on multiple fronts. In exchange for service, soldiers were given land, which incentivized them to remain in the army for long periods. Taxation reform. Taxation was a key part of Augustus's reforms. He created an efficient tax collection system, ensuring steady funding for the army and state expenses. Augustus increased tax revenues through effective anti-corruption measures and improvements in provincial collections. Senate reform. Despite the concentration of power in Augustus's hands, he maintained the importance of the Senate as an institution. He reduced the number of senators, focusing on those who were most loyal and capable of carrying out his orders. The Senate remained an important body, but its role became more symbolic, with real power resting in the hands of the emperor. The flourishing of art, architecture, and governance under Augustus, Rome experienced a flourishing in the fields of art, architecture, and culture. He understood that his reign should be immortalized, not only at the political level, but also at the cultural level. It was during this period that Rome became a symbol of grandeur and prosperity, and many of the achievements from this time left an indelible mark on history. Architectural transformations. One of the most notable achievements of Augustus's reign was the construction boom in Rome. He was determined to transform the city into the magnificent capital of the empire. Some of the most significant projects included the construction of a new forum, the Temple of Augustus, Roman theaters, and amphitheaters. He is famously quoted as saying, "I found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble," which clearly illustrates the scale of his architectural reforms. One of the most famous architectural landmarks of that era was the Temple of Peace, which was built to honor the great peace that was restored under Augustus. The architecture of this period was characterized by grandeur, austerity, and harmony. reflecting the ideals of Augustus's reign. Development of literature and the arts. Augustus also became a patron of the arts. He actively supported writers, poets, and artists, wishing to create a culture that would highlight the grandeur of the Roman Empire. One of the most famous poets of this period, Virgil, wrote the epic Aeneid, which became the foundation of Roman mythology and national identity. Virgil glorified the deeds of the ancient Romans and their path to greatness. Another well-known author of the time was Horace, whose odes and satires embodied the principles of morality and social responsibility. His works became a model for imitation and influenced Roman literature for centuries. Development of law. One of the most important achievements of Augustus's reign was the development of Roman law. Augustus actively promoted the creation of new laws and legal norms that would ensure order within the empire and regulate all aspects of life. Roman law became the foundation for many modern legal systems and played a crucial role in the history of humanity. Augustus became the founder of a new era in the history of Rome. His reign marked not only the end of the republican institutions, but also the beginning of the imperial age, which brought stability, prosperity, and new horizons to Rome. Augustus's reforms in the political, administrative, military, and cultural spheres had a long-lasting impact on the history of the Roman Empire, and his achievements remain a model for subsequent generations of rulers and peoples. The prosperous Rome he established became the center of the ancient world, and despite later crises, internal divisions, and external threats, Augustus's influence and his reforms remain key milestones in the development of civilization. Life in the Roman Empire was filled with contrasts, from magnificent palaces to crowded and noisy streets, from sophisticated aqueducts that provided water to the city to cramped, overcrowded homes. Every element of Roman infrastructure, from architecture to public organization, was aimed at creating order, convenience, and comfort for citizens, but also at showcasing the grandeur of the empire. In Rome and its surroundings, different types of housing were found depending on the social status and wealth of its citizens. A common Roman typically lived in an apartment building called an insula. These multi-story buildings could be unsafe and cramped, especially on the upper floors where poor people lived. Inside the insulae there was a shared kitchen and toilet, and rooms were divided with neighbors. While the house itself was mostly made of concrete and lacked large windows to protect from the heat and noise of the city, its interior was often decorated with mosaics and frescoes. However, most of these houses were located in poor districts and served as a clear example of the social distance between the wealthy and the poor in society. For the wealthy citizens of Rome, their homes were a source of pride. These houses, called villas, were located outside the city or in its quieter, more prestigious neighborhoods. Villas were luxurious mansions with spacious courtyards, gardens, and often their own baths, thermae. The interiors of these homes were magnificent. Marble floors, massive columns, frescoes on the walls, mirrors, and statues. Families belonging to the upper class could afford comforts such as heating during the winter months, as well as their own libraries and banquet rooms. One of the characteristic features of Roman homes was their orientation toward inner courtyards and gardens, creating an atmosphere of privacy. Unlike the city apartments where the outside world was noisy and dirty, in the wealthy homes, Romans could enjoy tranquility and nature. Urban streets of Rome. The streets of Rome were an important aspect of daily life. Despite the advanced engineering solutions in the Roman Empire for managing water and transport flows, Roman streets were narrow and not always paved. They were not designed for large amounts of traffic and were mostly used by pedestrians. Streets in central areas were wider and could be decorated with colonnades and monuments. But in some city districts, the streets were crowded with shops, merchants, and public entertainment. Some streets were designated exclusively for pedestrians, while others were for horses, carriages, and carts transporting goods and people. Roman engineering achievements. The Roman Empire became a symbol of highly developed engineering. One of Rome's most important achievements was the creation of aqueducts, a water supply system that provided the city with drinking water, as well as being used for irrigation and filling the baths. Romans built aqueducts across mountains, valleys and deserts using stone and concrete, and some aqueducts were several dozen kilometers long. The most famous aqueduct of Rome is the Aqua Appia, which is still partially preserved today. The water supply system was not only an important technological achievement, but also a significant economic factor, as it ensured a stable water supply for the population and was also used for fish breeding in some areas of Rome. Festivals and rituals. Life in the Roman Empire was closely linked to traditions and festivals. Romans knew how to celebrate, and these festivals were an important part of both religious and social life. The Romans had numerous holidays dedicated to both gods and important life events. One of the most popular festivals, the Saturnalia, was held in December and was dedicated to the god Saturn. It was a time of merrymaking, offerings, and gift exchanges. During the Saturnalia, social distinctions were suspended in Rome, and slaves and masters could exchange roles, symbolizing freedom and equality. Another important festival was the Lupercalia, during which ritual ceremonies were performed to protect Rome from evil and to ensure fertility. The festival in honor of Jupiter was also one of the grandest events of the year, featuring large sporting competitions, sacrifices, and theatrical performances. Most Roman holidays were connected to religious rituals, including sacrifices and prayers. Public theatrical performances and gladiatorial combats were also held, which were both entertaining and symbolic for Roman society. Baths, thermae, were an important part of Roman culture. They not only served to maintain hygiene, but also functioned as places for socializing, relaxation, and leisure. The baths were vast complexes with multiple pools, saunas, gymnasiums, and libraries. These structures, such as the famous baths of Caracalla, could accommodate thousands of people at once. Baths were open to all social classes, from the poor to the rich. However, wealthy Romans often built their own private baths, which were more luxurious and adorned with exquisite decorations. In addition to the traditional bathing culture, the baths were used for meetings with friends, sports activities, and cultural events. Role of women, slaves, and provincials. The Roman Empire was built on a patriarchal system where the role of women was largely confined to the home and family. However, despite this, women played an important role in public life and could influence political and social processes. Women in Rome were granted certain rights, although they did not have full civil rights. They could not participate in elections, but had the right to inherit property and manage their own wealth if they were widows. Married women typically managed the household and child-rearing. Yet, among women, there were also prominent figures, such as Livia Drusilla, the wife of Augustus, who wielded significant influence and played a key role in politics. Slavery was an integral part of the Roman economy and social structure. Slaves worked in the fields, in homes, on construction sites, and also in the army. A Roman slave had no rights, but he could earn money and in some cases gain his freedom. Many slaves were prisoners of war, captured during military campaigns. However, at times, slaves could rise up the social ladder, for example, if they showed special talents or loyalty. Provincials, the people from conquered territories, played an important role in the Roman Empire. Many of them became Roman citizens, which granted them certain rights, such as the right to participate in elections or the ability to serve in the army. However, for some provincials, Roman rule remained foreign and harsh. Nonetheless, after several generations, many provincials actively participated in Roman politics, culture, and military life. Life in the Roman Empire was multifaceted and eventful. Architectural achievements, cultural traditions, religious practices, and the daily life of citizens created a unique atmosphere that could not be forgotten. Despite the patriarchal nature of society and the exploitation of slaves, Roman culture had a profound influence on the entire Mediterranean world and left an indelible mark on human history. The Golden Age and philosophy. The period of rule by the Antonine dynasty in the Roman Empire is often referred to as the Golden Age. It was a time of internal stability, prosperity, expansion of the empire, and a high level of intellectual and cultural life. During this time, Roman philosophy experienced significant development, and Stoic philosophy became immensely popular. Stoicism was a philosophical school that had a profound influence on Roman emperors and rulers, particularly on famous figures such as Seneca and Marcus Aurelius. Stoicism as the foundation of philosophical thought. Stoicism was founded in the 3rd century BC in Athens by Zeno of Citium. The philosophy of the Stoics was based on the teachings about nature as the source of rational order and universal laws. The Stoics taught that reason is the most important part of human nature, and therefore people should be guided by it when making decisions. The principle of Stoicism was to focus on what is within our control and to approach with indifference what we cannot change. Key aspects of Stoicism include apathy, freedom from emotional disturbances, striving for calmness and inner harmony. Self-control, the ability to control one's desires and emotions by following reason and the laws of nature. Virtue, the pursuit of a righteous life based on honesty, courage, and justice. Stoicism attracted the attention of Roman philosophers and rulers because it offered a way of life in which one could deal with hardships, remain honest, and morally resilient despite external circumstances. This doctrine was especially appealing to high-ranking Romans who faced great responsibility and personal challenges. Seneca, philosophy as instruction. One of the most famous Roman Stoics was Lucius Annaeus Seneca, 440 BC, 65 AD. Seneca was born in Cordoba, modern-day Spain, into an aristocratic family, and his life was full of both achievements and tragedies. He became a senator and later an advisor to Emperor Nero. However, despite his high position in Roman politics, his philosophical teachings focused on criticizing social injustice, wealth, and luxury. Seneca taught that the pursuit of material goods and power is the source of suffering, and emphasized the importance of spiritual independence and self-control. Seneca wrote numerous treatises and letters in which he discussed ethics, morality, self-knowledge, and emotional management. His works remained popular throughout the Roman Empire and influenced many generations. For example, in his letters to Lucilius, Seneca argued that the right way of life requires a person to control their passions, master anger, and strive for harmony with nature. Of particular importance to Seneca was the understanding that death, being a natural part of life, should be approached with the awareness that every moment is valuable. In the end, Seneca was forced to take his own life on Nero's orders, accused of conspiring against the emperor. His death marked a tragic end to his philosophical life, but his teachings continued to live on and influenced philosophical schools both in Rome and beyond. Marcus Aurelius, philosopher-emperor. Marcus Aurelius, 121–180 AD, became one of the greatest Roman emperors and one of the most well-known representatives of Stoicism. His philosophical reflections on life, justice, and power were recorded in his meditations, which he wrote for himself to maintain his inner harmony and strength amid the vast power he wielded. Unlike other emperors, Marcus Aurelius did not seek to publicly display his power or luxury. His philosophy was practical and personal. He believed that an emperor should serve his people, not use his power for personal gain. In his meditations, Marcus Aurelius continually emphasizes the importance of humility, moderation, and selflessness. He taught that it is crucial to uphold reason and virtue under any circumstances, including the challenges of ruling, wars, and internal conflicts. For Marcus Aurelius, Stoicism was not just a philosophy, but a way of life. He always strove for inner harmony and discipline, despite external trials such as wars with barbarians on the empire's borders and political instability within Rome. His thoughts on resilience in the face of adversity and the search for the meaning of life had a profound impact on subsequent philosophical traditions. During the reign of the Antonine dynasty, Rome became the center of architectural and engineering mastery, and two structures, the Colosseum and the Pantheon, became symbols of this golden age. The Colosseum, arena for Rome's greatness. The Colosseum, or the Flavian Amphitheater, was built in the 1st century AD during the reign of Emperor Vespasian and his son Titus. This massive structure, capable of holding up to 50,000 spectators, served as a venue for gladiatorial combats and other public spectacles, such as naval battles, executions, and dramatic reenactments of mythological events. The Colosseum became a symbol of Roman power and cultural identity. It embodied the grandeur of Rome, as well as its ability to organize monumental spectacles that combined political propaganda with entertainment. Gladiatorial combats, despite their brutality, held significant meaning in Roman culture, symbolizing valor, strength, and courage. Furthermore, such events were used by Roman rulers to bolster their popularity with the masses. The Colosseum also became an important political tool. Emperors used it to entertain the people, distracting them from political issues while ensuring their rule through popular support. In this context, the arena was not only a place for combat, but also an instrument for stabilizing power. The Pantheon, Temple of the Gods. The Pantheon in Rome, built during the reign of Emperor Hadrian in the early 2nd century AD, became one of the most outstanding architectural achievements of Roman architecture. This temple, dedicated to all the gods of Rome, has a circular design and an incredible dome, which remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world even today. The Pantheon, symbol of Roman engineering thought. The Pantheon became a symbol of Roman engineering ingenuity. The use of concrete and other building materials allowed for the creation of a magnificent dome with a small window in the center, known as the oculus. This design allowed light to enter the temple, creating an atmosphere of sacred light and grandeur. The Pantheon was not only a religious structure, but also an embodiment of the power of the Roman Empire, showcasing its ability to construct and create majestic architectural projects. During the reigns of emperors Trajan, Hadrian, and Antoninus Pius, the Roman Empire experienced a golden age politically, culturally, and economically. Trajan. The Mai conqueror emperor Datus Emperor Trajan, 98–117 AD, became one of the most successful and famous Roman rulers. His reign was marked not only by successful conquests, but also by the expansion of the Roman Empire to its greatest territorial extent. During his campaigns, Rome conquered Dacia, modern-day Romania, and Trajan became the first emperor whose conquests significantly enlarged the empire's territory. Furthermore, Trajan showed concern for social policy. He implemented numerous Reforms aimed at improving the lives of the population, including the construction of roads, bridges, and aqueducts. Trajan also worked on improving Rome's infrastructure, including significant projects like Trajan's Forum and Trajan's Column, which became symbols of his victory over the Dacians. Hadrian, the builder emperor. Hadrian, 117–138 AD, was known, not only as an emperor, but also as an architect. His reign was marked by numerous architectural achievements. Hadrian built the famous Hadrian's Wall in Britain to protect against barbarian invasions and made significant changes to Roman architecture, including modifications to the Pantheon and other major buildings. He also sought to strengthen the empire's borders, abandoning further conquests. Hadrian was a proponent of Greek culture, and his reign became a time of cultural flourishing. He actively supported philosophy, especially Stoicism and Platonism, and also promoted the development of art and literature. Antoninus Pius, Peace and Prosperity. Antoninus Pius, 138–161 AD, was known for his moderate rule, which brought peace and stability to Rome. During his reign, the empire did not experience major wars or revolutions, and he focused on maintaining internal peace and prosperity. He actively continued the policies of his predecessor Hadrian, further strengthening the Roman provinces and caring for social policies. Antoninus Pius was also known for his attention to the rights of citizens and his efforts to improve living conditions in the empire. He took measures to protect the rights of slaves and women and continued to develop Rome's infrastructure. The Golden Age of Rome, during the reign of the Antonine dynasty, became a time of cultural flourishing and philosophical maturity. Stoicism had a profound influence on Roman rulers such as Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, while monumental structures like the Colosseum and the Pantheon embodied the power of the Roman Empire. Rome continued to thrive during this period, thanks to wise rulers like Trajan, Hadrian, and Antoninus Pius, whose reforms and conquests contributed to the prosperity of Rome and strengthened its position as one of the most powerful empires in history. Crisis and division. In the 2nd century AD, the Roman Empire reached its maximum geographical expansion and administrative stability. However, with the onset of the 3rd century, an era of anxiety, chaos, and unprecedented political instability began, known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century. This period lasted from 235 to 284 AD and was marked by economic collapse, internal uprisings, external pressure from barbarian invasions, epidemics, and the constant turnover of rulers. The empire, once mighty and invincible, was now teetering on the brink of disintegration, economic decline, the breakdown of the economic system, currency depreciation. One of the first and most destructive symptoms of the crisis was the rapid degradation of the monetary system. Over several decades, the silver content of the denarius, the primary Roman coin, sharply declined. While in the early 2nd century, the coin contained around 90% silver, by the middle of the 3rd century, this had decreased to barely 2%. The cause of this was the constant need for emperors to finance the army, which led them to debase the currency. Each new government minted its own coins, which lost value almost immediately. The population lost trust in the currency, resorted to bartering, or demanded payment in gold. Tax increases and the decline of agriculture. In attempts to replenish the treasury, the empire intensified the tax burden, especially on the provinces and agricultural regions. Farmers struggled to meet the increased demands, while crop yields declined, partly due to soil exhaustion, disrupted logistics, and continuous barbarian raids. Infrastructure also deteriorated. Many roads, bridges, and irrigation canals fell into disrepair. Exchange between regions became more difficult, and even large cities faced food shortages, epidemics, and demographic decline. Against the backdrop of economic devastation, epidemics became especially destructive. The plague of Cyprian, which affected the empire from 2149 to 2162 AD, claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, including many soldiers. Sources indicate that during peak periods, as many as 5,000 people died daily in Rome alone due to the disease. The population decline weakened the tax base, weakened the army, and disrupted social structures, the age of soldier emperors. After the murder of Alexander Severus in 235 AD, Maximinus Thrax, the first representative of the new wave of soldier emperors, came to power. He was born in Thrace and had a career in the army. His rise to power marked the transition from the Principate to an almost open military dictatorship. Maximinus became a symbol of the new order. The emperor was chosen by the army, not the Senate. However, the rule of such emperors was rarely long-lasting. Just 3 years later, Maximinus was killed by his own soldiers. This trend repeated itself time and again. Over 50 years, more than 20 emperors came and went, many ruling for only a few months. Amid the weakness of central authority, in 260 AD, the Roman Empire effectively split into 3 parts: the Central Roman Empire, controlled by Emperor Gallienus; the Gallic Empire, including Gaul, Britain, and Spain, proclaimed by Postumus; the Palmyrene Kingdom in the east, initially ruled by Odenathus, and after his death by Queen Zenobia. The Gallic and Palmyrene empires each had their own armies, fleets, economies, and even minted their own coins. Though both states were eventually brought back under central control, Palmyra by Aurelian in 273 AD and Gaul by Probus in 274 AD, this episode demonstrated the fragility of Roman unity. Threats on the borders. On the empire's outer frontiers, it faced powerful new enemies. To the east, the Sassanid Empire emerged, replacing Parthia. Shapur I not only defeated the Roman army, but in 260 AD captured Emperor Valerian himself, a unique event in Roman history. On the northern borders, Germanic tribes grew stronger. The Goths, Franks, Alemanni, and Vandals. They crossed the Rhine and Danube borders with ease, destroying cities, looting, and taking populations into slavery. The empire was in desperate need of reforms and new forms of governance. Diocletian and the beginning of change. In 284 AD, Diocletian, an energetic and determined military leader from a poor Illyrian family, became emperor. His reign marked a turning point in the history of the empire. He recognized that one person could not govern such a vast territory, especially one facing so many threats. In 293 AD, Diocletian introduced the system of the Tetrarchy from the Greek rule of 4. The empire was now officially governed by 2 Augusti, senior emperors, and 2 Caesars, junior co-rulers: Diocletian, Augustus of the East; Maximian, Augustus of the West; Galerius, Caesar of the East; and Constantius Chlorus, Caesar of the West. Each ruler governed a specific region, had their own residence, and controlled their own army. This allowed for more effective defense of the borders and a quicker response to crises. The Tetrarchy was innovative but unstable. After the abdication of Diocletian and Maximian in 305 AD, conflicts broke out between the Caesars and new claimants. However, the very idea of dividing power and territories set a precedent that would eventually lead to the final division of the empire into the Eastern and Western Roman empires. Diocletian also carried out significant economic reforms. In 301 AD, he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, attempting to halt inflation. The edict set price limits on more than 1,000 goods and services, as well as wages. Despite its strictness, violations were punishable by death. The edict did not have a lasting effect and was soon repealed. A new coin, the follis, made of copper with a minimal amount of silver, was introduced to stabilize the circulation of small change. He also initiated a population census and land audit for fairer taxation. Diocletian's reforms of the social structure. Diocletian also attempted to reform the social structure by binding peasants, coloni, to the land, which became a precursor to medieval serfdom. Under Diocletian and his successors, the military was reorganized. Field armies were created, capable of moving quickly and acting independently of the frontier legions. The borders were strengthened, with new fortifications and garrisons built. The army was divided into mobile forces and stationary garrisons. These new measures temporarily stabilized the military situation, but the costs of maintaining the army continued to rise, putting pressure on the finances. Diocletian also carried out the last major wave of persecutions against Christians between 303 and 305 AD. He sought to restore the old Roman religion as the foundation of state ideology. Churches were destroyed, sacred books burned, and thousands of Christians executed. However, just a decade later, under Constantine the Great, Christianity would become the officially recognized religion and eventually the dominant religion in the empire. The crisis of the 3rd century and its aftermath. The crisis of the 3rd century had called into question the very existence of Rome as a unified state. However, thanks to Diocletian's reforms, the empire managed to preserve itself, albeit in a changed form. The administrative division, new governance system, and military reforms laid the groundwork for the Byzantine statehood and the long survival of the Eastern Roman Empire. At the same time, the old Rome, based on civic virtues, senatorial tradition, and liberty, gave way to an empire with a rigid bureaucracy, centralized power, and a militaristic bent. This marked the beginning of the end for the Western Roman Empire, though it would still take nearly 2 more centuries before its formal collapse. Barbarian invasions and the fall of the West. By the mid-5th century, the Roman Empire was undergoing a severe crisis. The economy of the West weakened, taxes increased, and the army was increasingly made up of barbarian mercenaries who were loyal not to Rome but to their commanders. The empire could no longer defend its borders from external threats. Barbarian tribes once pushed by the Romans beyond the limes had now become an integral part of the empire's internal politics. Some were allies, others destroyers, and sometimes both at once. Attila and the Huns, the scourge of God. The Huns were a nomadic people who came from the steppes of Central Asia. They moved quickly, fought fiercely, and struck terror into all who crossed their path. The most famous of their leaders was Attila. He took command of the Huns in 434 AD and soon brought many Germanic tribes under his control, making them his vassals. Attila demanded vast sums of gold from the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, in exchange for peace. In 447 AD, he ravaged the Balkans, coming close to Constantinople itself. Later, he turned his attention to the west. In 451 AD, Attila invaded Gaul, modern-day France, but his army was stopped at the Battle of the Catalonian Fields by a combined force of Romans and Visigoths led by the general Flavius Aetius. Though the battle was not a decisive victory, the Huns were forced to retreat. Attila's invasion and the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The following year, Attila invaded Italy and devastated the northern regions, including Aquileia. However, epidemics, famine, and negotiations participated in even by Pope Leo I forced him to turn back. In 453 AD, Attila died under mysterious circumstances, and his empire soon fell apart. Vandals, Visigoths, Saxons, the fall from within. The Vandals were a Germanic tribe that, in the early 5th century, crossed the Rhine, passed through Gaul and Spain, and in 429 AD crossed into North Africa under the leadership of King Genseric. This region was vital for Rome as it supplied the capital with grain. In 439 AD, the Vandals captured Carthage and established their own kingdom. Later, in 455 AD, they captured and looted Rome itself. This event had a profound impact on contemporaries and became a symbol of the empire's helplessness. The Visigoths, another Germanic tribe, played an equally important role in the fall of the Western Roman Empire. In 410 AD, under the command of Alaric, they became the first to capture and loot Rome in history. After this, they moved to southern Gaul and established a kingdom centered in Toulouse. The Visigoths went from being enemies to allies, and back to enemies of Rome, their status constantly shifting depending on the political situation. The Saxons became a threat to Roman Britain. In the early 5th century, when the Romans left the island to defend themselves on the continent, the Saxons, Angles, and Jutes began seizing territories. This started a prolonged process that would lead to the formation of Anglo-Saxon England. The empire weakens, soldiers, emperors from the 3rd century onward, the Roman Empire was ruled by soldiers. They were proclaimed emperors by legions and overthrown by other legions. Emperors changed with terrifying speed. Central authority lost its prestige, and the armies were increasingly used in political struggles rather than for defending the borders. By the 5th century, this situation only worsened. Flavius Aetius, the last great Roman general, attempted to preserve the unity of the West through diplomacy and military strength. But in 454 AD, he was killed on the orders of Emperor Valentinian III, the very emperor whose rule depended on Aetius. Soon after, Valentinian himself was murdered. Emperors became puppets in the hands of barbarian generals. One such general, Ricimer, ruled the empire through puppet emperors. The real power lay with the generals and masters, not the formal rulers. In 476 AD, an event occurred that is generally considered the end of the Western Roman Empire. The Germanic leader Odoacer, commander of the barbarian forces in Italy, deposed the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus. This young man had been a puppet under his father Orestes, who had previously commanded the Roman army. Odoacer, and the end of the Western Roman Empire, Odoacer did not proclaim himself emperor. Instead, he sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, symbolically acknowledging that the empire was now unified and under the authority of the Eastern Emperor. However, in reality, the Western Roman Empire ceased to exist. In Italy, Odoacer declared himself King of Italy and received recognition from the Byzantine Emperor. This event marked a turning point. From this moment, power in the West passed to barbarian kings, and the former Roman provinces turned into barbarian kingdoms. The fall of the Western Roman Empire was not a sudden collapse, but rather a long process of disintegration, corruption, and external pressure. However, the year 476 became a symbol of the end of antiquity and the beginning of the Middle Ages, the aftermath of Rome's fall. New political structures began to emerge in the territories of the former empire. Germanic kingdoms adopted Roman institutions, laws, and religion. The Catholic Church inherited many functions of Roman governance and became the new unifying force in Western Europe. The historical significance of Rome's fall is hard to overestimate. It marked the end of one era and the birth of another, a world of feudal lords, knights, monks, and kingdoms. And though the political structure of the Western Roman Empire vanished, its legacy continued to live on in law, architecture, language, and culture throughout Europe for centuries. Barbarian invasions, causes, and consequences. The barbarian invasions were both a cause and a consequence of Rome's weakening. Attila, the Vandals, the Visigoths, and the Saxons all played their parts, but the empire's downfall was ultimately caused by internal contradictions, the loss of discipline, and the failure to adapt to new conditions. The final act of this great tragedy took place in 476, but its signs were visible long before. Rome fell, but it remains in history as one of the greatest civilizations whose influence is still felt today. What remains of Rome? When the Western Roman Empire fell in 476, its political framework disappeared, but the spirit of Rome continued to live on. In fact, it could be said that the Roman legacy outlived its creator and spread throughout the world, refracted through the lens of history, religion, language, law, and political thought. This chapter is dedicated to how Rome, once a republic, an empire, and a civilization, continued to influence humanity long after its formal end. Roman law, a lasting legacy. One of the most enduring and long-lasting legacies of Rome was Roman law. Its principles were systematized and codified, most notably in the Corpus Juris Civilis, a monumental compilation of laws created in the 6th century under the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I. This codification included the Institutes, Digest, Code, and Novels, forming the Corpus Juris Civilis. The very idea of written law, the distinction between private and public law, principles such as the presumption of innocence, the concept of contract, and legal capacity, all of these have Roman roots. During the Middle Ages, Roman law was rediscovered and studied in universities, especially in Bologna, and later spread throughout Europe. Even today, the civil law system in most European countries is based on the Roman legal tradition, including in France, Germany, and Italy. The legacy of Latin. Latin, the language of the ancient Romans, gradually transformed over time, giving rise to the so-called Romance languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. These languages retained Latin grammar, vocabulary, and syntax, though they underwent significant changes. The enduring legacy of Latin and the Roman influence. Moreover, Latin remained the language of scholars, diplomats, philosophers, and theologians. For a long time in the Middle Ages and the early modern period, it was the language of the Catholic Church and still retains its liturgical significance in the Vatican and during religious services. Scientific, legal, and medical terminology is largely derived from Latin. From the names of organs and diseases to legal terms like habeas corpus, subpoena, pro bono, etc., these all serve as evidence of the enduring vitality of Latin vocabulary. Although the Romans were initially pagans, the Roman Empire adopted Christianity as its official religion in the 4th century. It was within Roman structures that the Christian Church developed into a global institution. Constantine the Great, by signing the Edict of Milan, granted Christianity legal status, and later, Emperor Theodosius I made it the state religion. The Church inherited not only the language of Rome, but also its legal structure, titles, the idea of centralized governance, and even architectural forms. For instance, the Basilica, originally a Roman court building, later became a form of Christian church. The papacy and the Roman legacy. The papacy was formed within the Roman tradition of power. The Pope is considered the successor of St. Peter, the first bishop of Rome, and the Vatican is a direct heir to the cultural core of Rome. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the Eastern Empire, known to us as Byzantium, continued to exist for nearly another 1,000 years. Its capital was Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, founded by Constantine the Great as the New Rome. Byzantium, the continuation of Rome. Byzantium referred to itself as Romania. Its emperors held the title of Roman Basileus, and the people considered themselves Romans. Byzantine governance preserved Roman law, bureaucracy, the army, titles, and the idea of universal power. The empire survived numerous crises, but remained a living reminder of Roman greatness. Even after the capture of Constantinople in 1204 by the Crusaders and in 1453 by the Ottoman Turks, the Byzantine tradition left a profound mark on Eastern Orthodoxy, Slavic literacy, architecture, and politics. The Eastern Orthodox Church, centered in Constantinople, continued the Roman religious tradition, but in the Greek language. Byzantine liturgy, iconography, monasticism, and the idea of the symphony between church and state all became part of the Byzantine heritage. Many Slavic nations, including the Russians, Bulgarians, and Serbs, embraced orthodoxy and the Byzantine model of governance. Cyril and Methodius, Byzantine missionaries, created the Slavic alphabet, and the idea of Moscow, the Third Rome, was directly linked to Byzantium as the heir to ancient Rome, the Holy Roman Empire. After the fall of the Western Empire, the idea of Rome did not disappear but transformed. In the year 800, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. This act symbolized the resurrection of the imperial idea. Although this empire bore little resemblance to the original Rome, it laid claim to its spiritual and political legacy. The Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire existed until 1806, encompassing Germany, Austria, the Czech Republic, and northern Italy. Its emperors considered themselves successors of Caesar and Augustus, and the very idea of Christian Europe's unity was based on Roman universalism. Rome in the law and architecture of the modern era. The Renaissance gave a new impulse to the interest in antiquity. Architecture, literature, painting, and philosophy once again turned to the images and ideas of Rome. Lawyers and philosophers rethought Roman law, while humanists translated Cicero, Lucretius, and Virgil. Political thought in the modern era, especially in the works of Machiavelli, Hobbes, and Montesquieu, also carried Roman motifs, particularly ideas of the Republic, the Senate, and the separation of powers. The American and French Revolutions. The American and French Revolutions, in creating new republics, directly referenced Rome. Even the names Senate, Capital, Republic, Consul, all came from the ancient tradition. Washington, D.C. was built with architectural reminiscences of the Roman Forum and Pantheon, modern influence. In the 21st century, Roman heritage continues in many forms. In law, particularly in the systems of civil law, which are studied at universities around the world. In language, Romance languages are spoken across all continents, from Europe to Latin America. In religion, the Catholic Church remains the largest Christian denomination, and the Vatican exists as an independent state on the site of ancient Rome. The political idea of Rome as a center, a symbol of order and universal power, remains alive to this day. The European Union, despite the differences of eras, often references the rhetoric of Roman unity. Even films, literature, and games continue to draw inspiration from the imagery of Roman legions, senators, and emperors. The Eternal. City.Rome fell, but it did not disappear. Its army, senate, and emperors are a thing of the past, but its law, language, faith, architecture, and ideas continue to live on. In the minds of millions of people, it remains a symbol of order, law, power, and universalism. Rome is not just a city or an empire. It is an idea that cannot be destroyed by the sword, an idea that humanity inherited and continues to develop. As long as words are spoken in Romance languages, as long as judges refer to Roman law, as long as the Church speaks Latin and universities read Cicero and Titus Livius, Rome continues to live, the eternity of empires and their ephemeral nature. Rome, as one of the greatest phenomena in world history, embodies both eternity and ephemerality. Empires, like civilizations, seem unshakable and eternal when we immerse ourselves in their grandeur, surrounded by their achievements and glory. However, no matter how strongly we believe in their immortality, they are always subject to inevitable destruction once power or balance fades. Rome was the living embodiment of this contrast. Its might and glory became part of human history, but its empire disappeared, giving way to new eras and peoples. Rome was great, but nothing lasts forever. Rome was great, but nothing is eternal. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD, despite all its achievements, was a testament to the fact that no power, no matter how mighty, can escape its eventual decline. Yet despite this, the spirit of Rome remains in our culture, in our laws, language, philosophy, and even architecture. Its influence continues to live within us, in our societies and states, in our concepts of law and justice. In some sense, Rome never truly died. It transformed, just as history itself does. A quiet farewell to Rome. A fallen empire does not disappear immediately. Its remnants are firmly rooted in the memory of future generations. The farewell to Rome was not a dramatic one, but a quiet, smooth process, like the fading of the last star from the night sky, leaving behind only its bright echo. Although Rome as a political force ceased to exist at the end of the 5th century, its cultural legacy and influence continued to spread through the centuries. Like the generals and philosophers who led the people, the empire left its mark on how we understand justice, law, and governance. This departure was not grand, but it was beautiful and complete in its own way, a sleepy invitation in the spirit of peace and history. Thus, our story of Rome comes to an end, the great empire whose legacy has not faded over the centuries. As we delve into its world, we realize that history is not always predictable, but it always leaves lessons and mysteries behind. Rome, its people, ideas, and cultural heritage continue to live in our perception of the world. And no matter how the ages change, the great empires that left their mark live on in our memories and continue to influence us today. Now, it's time to rest and venture into the world of dreams, where we can continue to ponder eternity and transience, greatness and downfall, but also how history always returns in a new form. As you drift into peaceful sleep, remember that every moment, like every empire, has its end, but also its eternal trace in the history of humankind. May you dream of Rome, majestic and mysterious as it once was. And at the end, I invite you to listen to the sound of water flowing through the Roman cities via the aqueduct.